I'm here with Captain Dale White, who is the operations officer for the Navy Chaplains, and you are over the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard, I understand, as well.
Well, the Chaplain Corps has a role in providing religious ministry support to the United States Marine Corps and the United States Coast Guard, as well as the U.S. Navy. That's correct.
I was really interested. You mentioned this a little bit before in talking with Christiane about kind of setting up this interview, that a lot of the services that you provide are religion neutral. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, to some extent, there are four core capabilities that the Navy Chaplain Corps has. The one that's not religion neutral is to facilitate and provide. So all Navy chaplains are called to provide for their own faith groups, but to facilitate for all, so that when they're assigned to a unit, they are there to make sure that the religious freedoms, constitutional right to worship for all is provided for. However, one of the other core capabilities is to care for all, and that is, in my estimation and my 20 years experience, the real foundation of what we do. When a person walks into our office or into our hooch, if we're deployed downrange or into our offices on ship or ashore, and expresses a need, we are there to care for them and to care for that particular need, whatever it might be, a personal need, a family need, etc.
There's so many issues about communication within military families, and that's whether there's a deployment and somebody is far, far away, or even within the family, in particular afterwards. Excuse me. Talk a little bit about the kinds of things that you do to help families facilitate communication in a way that will maintain their relationships.
There's a whole host of things. From a programmatic standpoint, the Chaplains Religious Enrichment Development Operation, acronym CRADO, started 41 years ago, and now is a worldwide retreat program. One of the things that we do in those retreats, and we can talk more about this later, is offer marriage enrichment and family enrichment retreats, and a component of that is strengthening communication skills. There are many programs that chaplains offer when they're downrange to support communications with families. I think about an official program that's run that chaplains coordinate called United Through Reading, I think it's called, and usually the chaplains are entrusted with supporting that program, where they have the dads or the service members reading a book. They record that, and there's a system through which then they send that home, and so the children see dad reading a favorite storybook to them while they're deployed, and that's very special. Chaplains also work very hard at coordinating unofficial programs. When I was deployed in Iraq for over a year, one of the things that we coordinated was live video teleconference feeds back home. So service members could have 5 minutes on the television and just kind of talk like a Good Morning America interview, and talk with their spouse and their kids back home. It wasn't much, but if you had 50 or 60 guys, service members lined up, and in that case it was with United States Marines, 5 minutes, and their spouses were also lined up in a location back home, and they could sit in front of the camera and have just some one-on-one with their spouse and with their children. So there's just a plethora of things that we do to build those relationships.
I'm kind of curious about the retreats. Is that something that's sponsored or kind of required on a command level? And is it unit specific? How do you figure out who goes and where do you go and for how long?
Well, exactly. Our retreats are obviously optional. People are not required to go on a retreat. The retreats are either one-day seminars or 3-day, 2-night seminars, depending on the location. They're held in retreat centers or in hotels, and they're advertised, and families can register and attend those events. depending on the theme, build their own inner self-awareness in a personal growth retreat, build their relationship with their spouse in a marriage enrichment retreat, or take the whole family and develop a family system strengthening and a family enrichment retreat.
I actually had a chance to participate in one of those kind of on the periphery. I did a little bit of work with a couple Navy SEAL groups on the West Coast, and they had some in San Diego, and they had one at Disneyland. And I thought those were absolutely wonderful. Just first of all, that the guys were required to go, and also and then that these sort of superhuman people are sitting there talking about their kids and their families, and they've got tears in their eyes, and it's a terrific thing that they're encouraged to do that, and that they're given the space to do that in a non-judgmental sort of way.
Now, there are some units, like the one that you mentioned, that will have those post-deployment retreats that are mandatory, a retreat, for example, which is a little different than Credo, and that community has had a real focus on post-deployment family building, and their chaplains are involved as unit chaplains in that capacity. So it'll vary from unit to unit, but within the chaplain corps, not within the chaplain corps, but across the chaplain corps, the Credo model is the one that's really known within the Navy.
There are a couple really great features of the Credo program that you talked about, one of which is that it is free. Talk about that a little bit.
Exactly. We want to reduce the barriers, any barrier that would prevent someone from attending a Credo retreat. And so they're funded, which means that once a service member and their spouse or family attends, and there's a whole variety, depending on locations, from marriage enrichment to family enrichment to even dad's retreats and women's retreats and mom's retreats. So depending on who's going, they're free. They get there, the lodging is free, their resources are free, their meals are free, and they just attend and are totally focused on the topic and the theme and strengthening those relationships.
All right, so this is a completely off-the-track sort of a thing, but you mentioned optional. And I was just kind of taken back for a moment to boot camp. I'm Jewish, and was given a choice in boot camp of either Protestant or Catholic. I was not allowed on Sundays to sit around and read the paper. Tell me that was an unusual thing or something that people shouldn't be doing.
Well, I mean, again,
I got to say I didn't mind. It was actually very peaceful to go, but it just, it seemed a little odd.
Yeah, and obviously things have changed in the few decades since you were a Marine, and obviously over the course of time we've seen a wider array of faith and faith expression, and so we're very sensitive to that to make sure that no one is required to go to any kind of a faith or worship experience that's not their own. Yeah.
Do you find that people are reluctant to seek out the services of a chaplain in the same way that they might be reluctant to seek out a mental health kind of a person, that it carries some stigma?
It's interesting that you say that, and there are studies out there, I won't quote the official non-Navy organizations that have done studies, but there are studies that show that the unique role of a chaplain having absolute confidentiality really sets them on a different par than with mental health professionals. Not that I want to denigrate in any way the role of mental health professionals, because we work as chaplains and psychologists and social workers, mental health professionals, very closely. But by policy, chaplains have absolute confidentiality. And so when someone comes and shares something with them, that service member or family member owns the privilege. And if they choose not to release confidentiality, what they share stops with us. They're not required, we're not required to disclose any of that confidential information. Because of that, studies have shown, and non-chaplains have shared, that people are more inclined in those instances to seek out a chaplain because they know that they have that confidentiality, there's not that stigma, they can share, and they know that if it's going to go beyond the chaplain's going to work with them to get the help that they need. So very often we are on the front line of caring for folks who are victims of sexual assault, who are struggling with suicidal ideation, who are having issues at home in terms of relationship issues, abuse issues, and they know that they can come to us and wrestle with and get help for those concerns.
You don't have an obligation to, I don't want to say violate the privilege, but if somebody, you mentioned a victim of a sexual assault, if somebody's a victim of a crime, don't you have kind of an obligation to say something about that, or maybe to at least encourage the person to go to a different level?
We always do. And in my 20 years, I've only had one person who held me to the privilege and the confidential communication. If they've been a victim, in every case but one, I've been able to encourage them to go beyond the chaplain, to get the appropriate help, to work the system for their own benefit, and to work through the process.
How easy is it for the folks back home when there's a service member deployed to find you and access the kinds of services you have? And I'm especially interested in the reserve and guard components who may not be near a base, and for the most part they aren't near a base, or I hear all the time from people that their kids are the only kids in the school and they don't have the same support system. There's a chaplain care website, but is that the place where they should go?
If they're looking for chaplain support, certainly the chaplain care website, which is part of the Navy 311 system, where they can call, and there's a 24/7 call center, and if they want to talk to a chaplain, they can certainly work through that system, speak to a chaplain within a few hours, and get some guidance and some support. Being out there in the reserve world and disconnected and in a remote location is always going to have its challenges, and we don't have chaplains at every location. I do think that we work hard in our Credo system with our reserve forces to have Credo retreats in those remote locations where there's not a Credo center. However, we can't be at every small town. So we work to address it, but there's always gaps that need to be filled.
Talk a little bit about the Prep 5 communication program.
Well, I'm not overly well versed on the specific programs of the Prep and the pairs. What we do have is we have chaplains who are trained in a variety of family programs, whether it's Prep, whether it's pairs, personality inventories like Myers-Briggs and DISC, family enrichment programs. And what we entrust those chaplains to do is know the demand signals and what programs work in their particular areas. Ministering and providing retreats to Marines is very different than it is to providing for Navy submariners or Coast Guardsmen. And so we allow those chaplains to kind of, vet the programs that work for them, train up in them, and offer the most successful programs that have the most effective results for their communities.
And I was doing a lot of research a couple of years ago for a book that I wrote on fathers in the military, and spoke a lot with mothers in the military. And we were talking about kind of more modern technology than was available not all that long ago, where a lot of people are talking to each other on Skype. And I thought, what a fantastic thing, Skype, and they have cell phones and they can be in regular communication. But once in a while, and this was not just a one-time thing, probably 5 or 6 times, I had women in particular say, the Skype is, it's not always the greatest thing, because if I get my husband on the phone, or I get an email, and he says everything's fine, I believe that, everything's fine. If I look at his face, and I see he says everything's fine, and I can see it's not fine, I've got to turn the video off. How do you help somebody like that who is feeling, and it could be on the other side as well, from a dad or a mom who's deployed as well, who hears something at home that you can't possibly do anything about? How do you help somebody get through those really difficult moments of wanting to be connected, but you can't be?
Armin, that is a great question. When I joined the Navy, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have Skype. And I remember my wife giving me, for a 6-month deployment, 180 envelopes stamped with a stamp on it with her name and address and my return name and address and a number on the bottom right corner, number 1, number 2, all the way to number 180, with a piece of paper in it. And my job was to sit down every night and just write a note and give her a sense of the day when I could craft that. Now, I did cheat, and there were some days when I would skip, and she'd say, well, I got 5 or 6 letters in the mail all at once. And I said, well, it's got to be the mail. It's the post office. It wasn't the fact that I dropped them all in all at the same time. The challenge with technology is both for the giver and the receiver. Let me clarify that. For the person who is in combat, who is on the phone or on the Skype, when we're not in River City, when the communications are not shut down and they're able to communicate, here is the challenge. The challenge is, as they are talking, there may be events, real-world events unfolding. There may be something going on in the background, that the spouse hears, and they're alarmed. The other issue is the person who is in combat, who is talking to the spouse and hearing a situation going on at home that they wish they could resolve. I'm a guy and I'm a fixer, and I want to repair things. And if something's going on in a relationship with the children or something with the car, the combatant now is distracted. And they may have to go out on a convoy or on a patrol, and their mind is back home thinking, I got to get back to the base camp so I can call again.
Right, my child just got picked up for DUI or something. Yeah, I mean, they become a distraction to everybody around them, too.
Exactly. And so one of the jobs of the chaplain was to try and, as oddly as it is, try and focus that Marine or that sailor on their task, and to say, we will work with you at helping, getting a chaplain back home and working to resolve that issue, because we want to make sure that Marine is safe, doing their job focused, not distracted, so that they can redeploy back home. Indeed, the challenge with family members is the same. We want to make sure that they are cared for, but not overly worried. And sometimes too much information can be harmful. And family members will see, CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS, and be hearing about things going on downrange that their spouse may not even be near, but their mind just runs rampant, and they're thinking, that happened, is my spouse okay? So you're right, too much information and communication, there are benefits and liabilities to it.
Yeah, it just seems that it's such a difficult line to tread, because the more connected you feel, particularly for the deployed service member, the more connected he feels to the family, the easier it's going to be to transition home and to reintegrate in the family. And so you want to hear about all those things that are going on at home, because it makes you feel like you're there.
Indeed, at times, and sometimes communication is helpful, and it helps with the transition. You kind of feel like you haven't been away. However, on the other hand, as I said, too much information, and it can cause concern that really is unwarranted from the family members back home.
So the two things that are unfortunate to have to talk about, but I'm sure you're dealing with these things all the time, the very high divorce rate and the very high suicide rate. How's that affecting what you're doing, and how are you helping the families cope with these, whether it's to prevent a suicide or to help a family where there has been somebody who's been successful at that?
Yeah, let's talk about divorce, and always our focus is on trying to maintain healthy marriages and healthy families. And so with our marriage enrichment and family enrichment retreats, we talk about the stresses on the marriage. The average American going to work doesn't kiss their spouse on the front sidewalk and say, "See you in a year, honey." So just the nature of what we do and what our sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines do is unique. And so the programs that we offer across the services within the Navy, the marriage enrichment retreats, are critical at building stronger marriages. We're not going to save every marriage, but we do our best at providing programs and resources to mitigate divorce. Suicide, the second issue that you mentioned, is a grave concern within the United States Navy, and programs are being addressed beyond the chaplaincy across the Navy for us to be aware, to look for warning signs, and to be attentive to our fellow sailors and Marines and family members, to do everything we can, again, to mitigate and to support. Every life is important. Every person is critical. And suicide is a preventable act. So this is, beyond the Chaplain Corps, a Navy-wide concern, and it's being addressed across the services.
Okay. Is there anything that I'm missing?
Well, I would say that as a chaplain, we're honored to serve, and unlike serving in a local synagogue or a local parish or a local church or a local mosque, we have the unique opportunity to serve across faiths. And if you ask any chaplain, at least it's been my experience, that chaplains will say they count as some of their best friends a rabbi or an imam or a priest, and you're often not going to get that in a small town, in a community. We just work so collaboratively. I think about when I was the regimental chaplain in Fallujah, and one of my chaplains injured his ankle, and it was the High Holy Days, and a dear friend of mine, a rabbi, was coming through to do High Holy Day services, and the question came up, we need an additional chaplain to cover down for the injured chaplain. It was a non-combat injury. And I said, the rabbi's coming through. I'm not sure his wife was pleased that his 2 weeks through the High Holy Days extended to 3 months in a combat zone, but he did exactly what we all do. He got involved in that battalion, and before you knew it, emails were coming out from the rabbi about the Christian Bible study that he was making sure got publicized. That's what we do. We care for all across faith groups. We address issues. We're there to support, and it's a great honor. And I think any chaplain that's serving would say the same thing. It's an honor to care for our sailors and Marines and their families, especially during these very trying times.
2 more quick things, even though it was a perfect place to end. I'll have to go back and edit this in. But about the marriage, do you do premarital counseling and workshops before because I've heard really wonderful things about those programs and how they're sometimes you end up talking somebody out of getting married, but that they end up having a much lower divorce rate afterwards.
Yes, in the services, there are pre-marriage programs that chaplains are involved in but don't necessarily coordinate, and those are 1 to 2 day programs. I think Marine Corps Family Team Building is one of those entities that runs those workshops. Chaplains, based on their faith backgrounds, have different requirements for pre-marriage counseling. In my particular faith group as a United Methodist, I think it's important to spend a number of sessions working through critical issues such as roles and communications and expectations and larger family issues with a couple. And so if I have a couple that comes to me and asks me to do their wedding, I make a contract with them and say, I'll be glad to do your wedding. I do require, 3 or 4 sessions, prior to the wedding to talk about some important issues and provide them resources and have some discussions on that. And if they don't have time for that, then as a chaplain, one of my roles is to find someone who can do their wedding if they don't want to have those. But I do encourage and say, you're making an investment here, and you wouldn't invest your money somewhere if you didn't do some research. And so I think it's important for you to do some research in healthy marriage and healthy relationships before you say I do.
So everybody's got a chaplain, hopefully, in their immediate vicinity on base or in their unit someplace. For those who don't, how can they get a hold of you? How can they access the Chaplain Care website?
Yeah, they can go to chaplaincare.navy.mil and they can contact the Navy 311 24/7 call center and get access to a chaplain. That's especially good for families who have sons and daughters who are sailors who don't live near a military installation, may want to talk to a chaplain or make sure their son or daughter, sailor or Marine, has access to a chaplain. That's how chaplain care is used very often. If they have a concern, but their sailor or Marine is expressing that they don't know who their chaplain is, they can work through chaplain care, and a chaplain is connected up to that sailor or Marine pretty quickly.
We've been talking about military families, and I think in my mind that immediately kind of, you think of the military family unit, the mom, the dad, the kids. You have plenty of single people who are coming in, and their parents, who are not in the military, may be panicking about something, or they may be just plain worried about something. Do you deal with the families who are in the civilians?
We do, and that really is addressed through our chaplain care. We have a number of web resources. Going back to the Credo, every Credo has a social media Facebook page, and people can go online and go to Chaplains Religious Enrichment Development Operation, or Credo, and then find the local Credo near them to get schedules and so forth. Our chaplaincare.navy.mil page, which allows for people to access chaplains through Navy 311, is really our connection to family members. That's where we get moms and dads, aunts and uncles who need to talk, want to find out what kind of support structures are in place for their sailor or Marine family member. And I would say from my experience as well that when those individuals reach a chaplain, we're going to spend some time talking with them to give them some reassurance. They may be in a remote location in the United States and can't see us face to face, but they're going to get that chaplain support and care to nurture them, and they're really part of the extended Navy family as well.
Captain White, you're doing great work. Thank you so much for taking the time.